Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you are interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, March 21st. The councils provide information and recommendations to the Federal Subsistence Board on subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing. For more information on the advisory councils and how to apply, call 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov. This message sponsored by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, Alaska's pipeline to the future, delivering oil today, sustaining operations for tomorrow, committed to safety, operating the 800-mile Trans-Alaska Pipeline since 1977.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 18th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with the latest information online at weather.gov/Alaska or go to weather.gov and click on Alaska to take you immediately to your nearest Weather Service forecast office. The Weather Info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can listen to our broadcast on the NOAA Weather Radio at any time and find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube throughout your day. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation as it goes for tonight. The winter weather advisories for Southeast have been dropped at this point. However, we are continuing one for the Thompson Pass area as we head into the night and tomorrow. Looks like the visibility will drop down as we get some gusty winds through the region, and with that, the winter weather advisory is in effect at this point. As we look out around the west, you can see a number of storms lined up again across the North Pacific, really not a whole lot different than what we were talking about at this point yesterday. The strongest of which is passing south of the central Aleutians. And we have another storm spinning up here south of the Kamchatka Peninsula and in the eastern Asian waters there just off the coastline. This storm is currently producing storm warnings there across the central parts of the Aleutians, especially the Pacific side, but also areas just north of Adak and Atka. As that travels to the east, the winds will rapidly diminish after tomorrow afternoon for many areas, so we're not expecting those winds to continue. Across most of Alaska, high pressure is gaining a lot of ground and starting to chip away at the cloud cover that we've seen. For Southeast, periods of rain and snow have continued, but obviously they've dropped off a little bit, and the intensity that was earlier there has now fallen away, so the winter weather advisories once again have been dropped. Still seeing some few areas of rain mixed with snow across some of the central and southern parts of Southeast. For South Central, the clouds are breaking up fairly quickly. We're still seeing some partly to mostly cloudy conditions across the interior and looking at a mainly gray sky across the Arctic coast. To the west, a little bit of low clouds still lingering across Bristol Bay, and then a wide swath of clearing. Out to the west, you can see the clouds being spun up into the Bering Sea from the Pacific from that much stronger system that's just grazing the Aleutians at this point. Places like Adak and Atka likely seeing some of those stronger winds. Weather right now shows low pressure sitting very close to Southeast at 1,001 millibars. Again, some pockets of rain and snow all the way down to the southern tip of Southeast. Otherwise, rain across the Pacific Northwest, much drier weather out across the Gulf. You can see a speckledy kind of mackerel sky across a large part of the Gulf. Low pressure sitting around the Brooks Range at 1,012 millibars. Working with an area of low pressure there to keep a few areas of light snow across the coastal plain and around Kotzebue Sound. Kotzebue and Kivalina, we're seeing some snow earlier this afternoon. And across the west, warmer air traveling northward fairly quickly, reaching into the eastern part of Asia. High pressure gaining a lot of ground, like I said, at 1,029 millibars. This will gradually move into the heart of Alaska and chip away at the clouds for more and more places, probably stirring up the winds in some of those favored gap areas, though, as we get into the mid part of the week. Meanwhile, low pressure at 980 millibars sitting south of Adak and Atka, spinning some of those stronger southeasterly winds up across the central and eastern Aleutians. Look for a little more wind to travel eastward as we head into tonight and tomorrow. As we get into the overnight hours, 984 millibar low, I should say, it will be south of Adak. The occlusion still working over the Aleutians again, just kind of grazing the chain there as it moves to the east and generally back to the south and into the western Gulf. Low pressure will create a broad area of a trough across the northern parts of southeast. Rain for the most part, with some areas seeing a little bit of snow toward the higher terrain. Scattered snow showers are possible across the interior. Fairbanks, you'll start seeing some light snow as we head into the overnight and probably into tomorrow. Places around the Chukchi Seacoast and around Kotzebue, Kivalina up toward Point Hope. Probably looking at least some light snow as we head into the overnight. And low pressure shifts to the east from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That down to 992 millibars. Our high pressure system still trying to get rid of all the snow showers across Norton Sound. Probably still looking at a few around Nome during the overnight into the early morning, but those will be waning away. As we get into Wednesday, look at the wide swath of clearing shaping up across the west coast, the YK Delta, Bristol Bay, even Kodiak, looking at a pretty dry sky. The same goes for Kotzebue Sound at 1,037 millibars. Scattered snow showers continue for parts of the higher train of southeast, maybe northern areas around Haines and Skagway. Scattered areas of rain and snow around this boundary will continue as we head into Wednesday afternoon. To the west, colder air is dropping east from the Kamchatka Peninsula now, and you can see some of the warmer air trying to lift north. Eventually this will separate and probably swing out, creating a new occlusion. In the meantime, our storm that was across the North Pacific is dropping southward again and losing its frontal boundary characteristics. So we'll keep our southeasterly gradient from the central and eastern Aleutians, probably still looking at some stronger winds, and those will be pushing toward places like Sandpoint and maybe eventually toward Kodiak, but a lot of this is really going to diminish fairly quickly as we go through the day on Wednesday. So we'll start out with some pretty gusty winds, and a lot of that should fall off as you go throughout the day. So what you see in the morning in port, probably not what you get in the afternoon when you come back in. High pressure sitting around Kotzebue Sound at 1,037 millibars. We'll push that area of scattered snowfall eastward into Fairbanks. So again, look for some opportunities for accumulating snow there. And by Thursday, it's all gone. That wave just washes out. High pressure is at 1,037 millibars. And once again, just clearing a wide swath of real estate from the Seward Peninsula all the way into Northway and Eagle, just about to Anchorage. You can see the cloud line trying to lift its way northward again with that east to westerly flow. Kodiak's back in the clouds, rain and snow well to your south, and southeast drying up a little bit with a better chance for some light snowfall or scattered showers anyway, across places generally north of Sitka up toward Gustavus, maybe Juneau. Another storm, the one that we were watching coming off of eastern Asia, now in our weather picture here by Thursday at 984 millibars, creeping up on Attu. Looks like the frontal boundary is lifting northward of the central and western Aleutians by the end of Thursday afternoon, and that'll crank up the winds again from the south generally across the central and eastern chain. With low pressure here across the western Gulf. Of course, that will tie into it a little bit as we head toward the end of the week. But for right now, severe clear it looks like for a large part of west, southwest, and maybe even the interior around Denali. Perhaps we'll get some good views looking at any direction toward the big one. Temperature-wise, 30s and 40s for southeast today. You'll notice Juneau is around 34, Sitka 37, Ketchikan and Annette in the 30s and 40s today. Hyder 32, Valdez is showing 34, Cordova about 38 degrees, 39 around Middleton Island. Most of the Kenai Peninsula was in the mid-30s, including Anchorage at 37, Talkeetna at 36, Glen Ellen 32, and Kodiak saw temperatures ranging from 31 to 38 on either end of the island. Fairbanks was 25 up the road in Denali. It was closer to 30 degrees in Healy. Greeley was 29, Northway and Eagle in the 20s and 30s today. Further north, you saw Fort Yukon at 14. Arctic Village was only 9. Anaktuvuk Pass 10. Ambler and Bettles pushing 20 degrees on either end. And around the Arctic coast, most areas were at or below about 5 degrees today. Atkasuk was about 0. Kaktovik 4 above. 8 in Kivalina, 8 in Kotzebue as well, with Shishmaref at 5, 6 in Nome. Unalakleet showing 9 degrees by late afternoon. And Bethel was checking in at 6. Nunivak Island 12. St. Lawrence Island also holding around 9 degrees. McGrath was 21. Bristol Bay in the upper 20s. Most of the Alaska Peninsula in the 20s and 30s today, with Dutch Harbor 31. The Pribilofs just shy of freezing, and the central and western Aleutians also just above freezing in the mid to upper 30s for the most part. Overnight low temperatures then back in the mid-30s with the Pribilofs in the lower 20s, Bethel at 6 below, Nome 14 below, the Arctic coast from 5 to 15 below. Fairbanks looking at 10 and milder weather building into Ambler and Bettles during the night with temperatures there above 0. For McGrath, look for a low of 1 below, south central including Talkeetna and the Susitna Valley in the teens and 20s. Kodiak 24, southeast looking at temps at or just above freezing there, but not by much. For high temperatures tomorrow in southeast, expect most areas closing in on 40 degrees. Coastal areas and extreme southern ports will be looking at temps above 40 degrees. Prince William Sound in the lower to mid 30s. Cordova, one of the warm spots at 38. Homer and Seward both in the mid 30s. 36 in Kodiak, 31 in Talkeetna, 26 in Healy, with Fairbanks looking at temperatures around 28 degrees. Fort Yukon 19, Anaktuvuk Pass about 8, 12 in Nome, southwest including Hooper Bay. Bethel likely in the low to mid teens. Bristol Bay pushing 20 degrees, 36 in Kodiak, mid 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, 37 in Unalaska Dutch Harbor, and Adak and Eka just about, but not quite, 40 degrees. Flying weather shows a wide swath of MVFR conditions across the coastal plain tomorrow. You'll see that new storm that's working across the central Aleutians now, creating a broad area of IFR out ahead of that frontal boundary. That could include Unalaska and Dutch Harbor tomorrow, so be prepared for some visibility changes there. And again, the winds will be the worst in the morning. Out across the west, a new area of IFR is developing south and west of Attu. And then as you get across southeast, you can see that swath of MVFR still taking a swipe at most of the southeastern part of the state and stretching into the eastern sections of the Alaska Range, and that will affect some pass conditions there. Anaktuvuk Pass expected to be MVFR through most of your Wednesday. Same goes for Adigan Pass as we go through the midweek. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be turning over to VFR with high pressure now in control. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass should also see VFR, but Windy Pass may start out at MVFR in the morning hours, so watch for some of those changes and improvements during your Wednesday there. Isabel Pass should be marginal. Turbulence probably not going to be a huge issue for Tanita Pass, and VFR conditions are expected there. Porter's Pass is looking pretty good for visibility, and Chilkoot and White Pass, as we saw, likely under at least MVFR during your Wednesday. Freezing levels shows that warmer air is really slacked off a little bit across the eastern parts of the Gulf now. Those freezing levels down to 2,000 feet, and those are dropping quickly there as you don't see any new surge of low pressure running up the coast. Colder air is dropping southward, also south of Kodiak Island now, as high pressure is pushing some of that colder air a little bit more into the Gulf. But you can see the effects of that stronger storm across the North Pacific, lifting up some of the warm and wet air into the central Aleutians. Freezing levels there around Adak and Atka and just west of Nikolsky, probably as low as 2,000 feet and maybe a little bit higher up toward 4,000 feet. Icing potential is slim. We haven't seen too many icing reports today. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but it just means we haven't heard of it. So again, if you have some icing reports or turbulence reports, we always love to see those PIREPs there. So your ability to file those reports helps us do a better job forecasting, which in turn should be helping you fly safely. Across the eastern parts of the Alaska Range and Copper River Basin out toward the upper Yukon, there's a possibility for some light to isolated moderate icing, generally below 12,000 feet and above 4,000 feet. A little bit of that hanging outside the Dixon entrance and south of Sitka. And then along that trough boundary that's trying to creep in on high pressure, there's enough moisture there and lift that we could see some light isolated moderate icing potential, again, below 12,000 to above about 4,000 feet. The jet stream has a pretty odd configuration right now, but it's really got two parts. So if you look at it like that, it's a little bit easier to understand. This core of the jet stream is running just to the south of Alaska. That's where most of the storms are wanting to travel. But we have this interruption. This is the second part, this upside down shaped U. This is a high pressure pattern. We've seen this in the summer. We've even seen it in the winter. This is kind of a blocking pattern trying to set itself up. We'll see how long it lasts, but we've got a very strong southerly flow on the west side, and that's where that storm is kind of being torn apart there that we saw moving toward Alaska. Here's our current storm. This one will likely travel across the Gulf and fall apart. And then we've got the colder airflow coming down on the eastern side of this, and that's going to end up going into the 48 at some point. Right now, this is going to really set up a pretty good blocking stage for a good part of western and central Alaska. It means most areas are going to be pretty dry, but if you're on the eastern side of this boundary, you're going to get some snow, and that's what Fairbanks was looking at as we head into the midweek. 9,000 feet, high pressure sitting across the YK Delta. Again, it's got some faster winds rotating out and away from high pressure. Remember, high pressure rotates in a clockwise fashion here, pushing that air southward as you go on the right side of that. A little bit of a trough here just on the northern parts of the Gulf. Weak area of low pressure just west of Sitka. The wind speeds wrapping into this anywhere from 20 to as high as 50 knots. The stronger winds with that, again, the 50 knot level just north of Barrow and Kaktovik. And across the Bering Sea, a 30 to 50 knot wind wrapping into the low pressure system that's just west of the Gulf of Vanadier and Sea of Okhotsk. Out across the North Pacific, weak area of low pressure there, also trying to lift northward, but we also have this ridge sitting across the Gulf, so that's really going to hold that back. And we've got our stronger ridge now underneath that upside down kind of blocking pattern we saw in the jet stream. So it's got a lot of support to stay right where it is. And at 3,000 feet, you can see the winds wrapping out of that anywhere from 35 to as high as 60 knots. So a lot of wind up there north of the Bering Strait. And then the winds die down as they wrap into that weak zone of low pressure across the central and southern parts of southeast. Wind speeds pretty light across the northern Gulf coming out of Prince William Sound and toward Kodiak Island, only 5 knots there. So turbulence, what do we have? Well, light isolated moderate across the central parts of the Bering Sea, below 4,000 feet, looking at those southeasterlies, probably making some chop around Unalaska Dutch Harbor, and with the poor visibility, it might be a little bit of a tricky flying day around Dutch Harbor tomorrow, so watch yourself there. You'll run into some areas of stronger turbulence, likely below 4,000 feet to the surface. Across the north and western Gulf, flying should be relatively okay. Across the interior, things look pretty good. You'll probably find some chop across parts of southeast, just hit and miss there. With low pressure sitting right about here, we're probably looking at some wind shear, low-level wind shear across some of the southern islands, generally below 6,000 feet and around Haines and Skagway up toward Yakutat in very patchy form. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
This is a picture of myself and my son, and a picture of the Edrie in the background.
In the summer of 1958, Howard Ulrich was a commercial fisherman from Pelican, following feeding birds and word that the fish were biting near Lituya Bay.
We came in there somewhere around 6 or 7 o'clock at night and had made dinner and anchored up and went to bed. In fact, I was asleep, and then that earthquake started, so that woke me up. I saw the splash. Something I was looking off on at the shoreline, and something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention, and it turned out to be this big splash. Okay, then the splash, you see that big horrible splash, and it looks like, you know, like Bikini, where they set off the atomic bomb, you know. But then as the water is falling back down, you know, into the bay, out of the bottom of that came this big wave. And that wave was actually, we figure, it was about 800 feet high.
So you, Howard, were right here.
Right.
And you saw the debris fly up in this far end near the head of Lituya Bay.
Right.
The wave then moved across, was 800 feet high out in this area, you figure. Ulrich estimates the original 1,720-foot wave had dropped to about 150 feet by the time it reached them.
We're actually looking down in the trees, and I'm pretty sure we were over the land at that time, and still, you know, pushing that old Chrysler Crown to get us up over the top of that wave. And then, of course, the water coming back down off of the land gave us another push out, helped us out, actually. So everything worked out about as good as it could.
Ulrich says his son's only memory of the wave is the fear on his father's face.
I just felt another small tremor, so I better try and get the heck out of here right away, I guess.
By now, the water was churning with smaller waves filled with giant trees and ice chunks. Ulrich worried they'd cut off his escape route.
There's a big bunch of junk closing in behind me here, so I'm going to have to go out. It's just solid. It's just like it's growing. The whole thing came off, of course, brush and everything. It's just solid behind me, and when it comes out, it's going to block the whole entrance. So I guess I better get the hell out of here.
Howard and Sonny were the lucky ones. The Badger was tossed over the spit near the bay's entrance and swamped. Bill and Vi Swanson were rescued, but Bill died in Lituya Bay only a few years later on his one and only return trip. The Wagners and the Sunmore just disappeared.
God, what an awful sight. You ought to see it in here. It's like the end of the world.
Did you think you were going to make it, or did you even have a
No,
thought
I
like
didn't
that?
think it just surprised me when we got to the top of the wave. The thing that saved us, of course, is the wave didn't break. It was just a big round wave, and just a big swell. And boats are made to handle big swells.
Despite his wild ride, Ulrich has no fear of the water. He's retired now in the picturesque coastal community of Sitka. There have been at least 9 major earthquakes along the Fairweather Fault in Lituya Bay since 1899, yet life always finds a way to return. Though major waves had struck Lituya Bay about once every 25 years since 1899, it's now been almost half a century since the largest tsunami ever recorded.
I've had the geologist who flew up there the day after this happened, and he said that the whole top of that ridge is fractured. He said it's going to happen again and again and again.
What we do know is that the land that is between that fault line and the ocean has not yet docked or held on solidly. So geologists and glaciologists say that that land is moving northward more quickly than on the continental plate. And so we assume that there will be more earthquakes. Will they happen in Lituya Bay? Will Lituya Bay send another tsunami wave out? No one knows for sure. But I think that anytime anyone enters the bay, they think about those legends and they wonder if it'll happen again.
And don't forget, the Great Shakeout will happen on March 27th. And if you haven't registered for your house, for your school, your business, or even your church, make sure you do that. It's always a good time to remember what your earthquake preparedness level is and see where your shortcomings are so that when the next one happens, you're ready to go, no matter where in Alaska you are. Here's a look at the ice edge from yesterday, and again, just about 30 to 40 nautical miles north of St. Paul's where we start to see those ice strips once again. As the winds change, though, going into the end of the week, a stronger southerly flow there, we expect to see that ice edge lift a little bit further northward. As always, you can see the latest ice edge from Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, as analyzed by our Sea Ice Program experts there at pafc.arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php, and you'll have the tools you need to make a map similar to this. On Wednesday, in southeast, more of a variable and pretty light flow there across the North and South Lynn Canal. 5-knot winds with 2-foot seas. A little bit more of a southeasterly flow coming up across the south and the southern channels there. 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. And a variable flow up across the northern waters. Easterly flow coming offshore around Yakutat with 15 knots. Onshore around 15 knots. And then points south, that becomes slowly southwesterly flow coming into places like Craig with a 12-foot sea. As you get into Thursday, the flow reverses course. More of an offshore wind there from Yakutat all the way down to the northern entrances south of Sitka. That's a 10 to 15 knot onshore flow. Southeasterlies continue in the southern channels, and then we get our northerly wind back across the Lynn Canal, becoming a little more northeasterly across Fredericks Sound and Stevens Passage there. 15 to 20 knots with a 3 to 4-foot sea across the north and central waters. Across the north and western Gulf, we have a broad north and westerly flow moving the air offshore. It's pretty dry, and it looks like that will continue. Across the northern Cook Inlet, a variable flow around 10 knots. North and northwesterly flow coming down the Cook Inlet, becoming a little bit stronger there, heading over the Barren Islands, 25 to 30 knots. A northerly flow coming out of Prince William Sound, 15 to 20 knots there. 7-foot seas on the outside of Prince William Sound. And once you get into Thursday, you have that north and easterly flow coming down Cook Inlet into Shelikof Strait, picking up a little bit of speed there at 25 knots, and 25-knot winds across the north and western parts of the Gulf, with seas running between 6 and 9 feet on the eastern side of Kodiak Island. Across the Alaska Peninsula, a northwesterly flow coming out of Chignik there, 20 knots with a 6-foot sea. Northeasterlies becoming a little more easterly the further south you go, 25 to 35 knots on the Bering side. Freezing spray is an issue. Easterlies south of Sand Point and King Cove up to 35 knots. Small crafts there at 12-foot seas. And for Thursday, the winds diminish there down to 25 knots. Really in all areas the winds are dropping down. 6 to 8-foot seas on the Bering side and 11 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side. For the Aleutians now, the stronger winds that we've seen today will gradually shift northward a little bit, so west of Nikolsky to Atka and across Nikolsky to Unalaska and points north. 45-knot winds with higher gusts, but again, that's only going to be in the morning. It looks like things rapidly diminish as we go through the day, so what you see in the morning should be rapidly improving as you go through your day. 25 to 40-knot winds on the Pacific side, again improving as we go through our Wednesday. A north and northwesterly flow in the west, 25 to 30 knots with 13 to 16-foot seas. And then you can see by Thursday already we're setting up for the next storm with southeasterly winds there, 20 to 30-knot winds with seas ranging between 8 and 11 feet across the Bering and 11 to 15 feet across the Pacific side, with winds there from 25 to 30 knots and more of an easterly flow out around Attu at 35 knots with a 14-foot sea. Across the west, an offshore flow thanks to our friend high pressure sitting across Norton Sound. 25 knots there, generally closer to the coastline. St. Matthew Island waters a little bit higher, and the Pribilofs up to 40 knots thanks to our storm in the south. Again, your strongest winds will be in the morning. 13-foot seas there, 7-foot seas closer to the coast. Those come up a little bit more to 8 feet by Thursday with an easterly flow at 30 knots, and winds diminish around the Pribilofs, 25 knots from the east with a 10-foot sea. Across the Arctic coast now, a southerly flow reaching up through the Bering Strait at 15 to 20 knots, 25 knots from the south and west over Point Ley. And we run into east and southerly winds across the Beaufort seacoast around 15 knots. The winds shift just a little bit more to the south and west as we get into Thursday, and that southerly flow still running up the coast between 15 and 20 knots as we get into Thursday there. Generally, not much of a change there as we go from Wednesday to Thursday. Recapping your weather tonight, a weak area of low pressure sitting off the coast of southeastern Alaska will keep periods of rain and snow, even mixing together across the southeastern part of our state. The winter weather advisories have been dropped. However, we have a new advisory for the Thompson Pass area due to blowing snow. Watch for visibility issues there. Scattered snow showers across the interior all the way up into the Kotzebue Sound region. Look for accumulating snow around Fairbanks with low pressure across the North Pacific, 984 millibar low, pushing that occlusion up across the Aleutians briefly with some storm force winds tonight and into tomorrow, and another wave of low pressure coming off of eastern Asia will slide eastward a little bit more as our North Pacific low drops a little bit further to the south and begins to weaken. So we should see rapid improvements in wind across the chain as we get into your Wednesday morning and into the afternoon. Things should improve even more. We'll continue to spin up some pockets of rain and snow across southeast. It does not look like anything terribly heavy at this point. However, Fairbanks looking at a couple inches of accumulation there. And across the Chukchi Seacoast, snowfall will continue generally in the morning. Nome should break out into sunshine. South and western Alaska will be looking at more sun. And as we get into Thursday, high pressure is still in charge just south of Ambler at 1,037 millibars. It looks like a good case for severe clear anywhere from Fairbanks to Eagle and Northway, southward toward Anchorage and Bristol Bay, all the way up to YK Delta and into Norton Sound and Nome, with a new storm spinning up across the North Pacific at 984 millibars. That's a look at your Alaska weather. Enjoy your evening. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you are interested in serving on your local Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council, the deadline to apply is Friday, March 21st. The councils provide information and recommendations to the Federal Subsistence Board on subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing. For more information on the advisory councils and how to apply, call 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov. This message sponsored by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.